The Dark Pharaoh. Pharaoh Amenemhat was a ruler unlike any other in Egypt's history. Despite his immense wealth, power, and a thriving kingdom, there was one thing that intrigued him above all else: the tombs of his ancestors. Every night, he would slip away from his royal duties and wander through the labyrinthine hallways of the Valley of the Kings and Queens. The cold stone walls, lined with hieroglyphs depicting the great deeds of Egypt's past, filled him with awe and reverence. But also he felt something else, a haunting curiosity. One night, as the moonlight filtered through the dusty halls, he came across something he had never noticed before. A tomb, hidden deep in the recesses of the valley, stood untouched. It was not marked with the same symbols as the others. Its door was sealed with dark, brittle stones. There was an unsettling aura around it, an eerie silence that seemed to scream for attention. Drawn by a force beyond his understanding, Amenemhat approached the tomb and, with a quiet murmur, commanded the stone to be moved. As it cracked open, a thick, black fog poured out, swirling and swirling like smoke from a cursed fire. The fog rushed at him with an almost sentient force, consuming his body and mind. His vision darkened. The tomb around him became a blur as the shadows wrapped around him, filling his soul with an unnatural hunger. The fog whispered ancient words, an invocation to a long-forgotten power. Amenemhat, now overwhelmed by its influence, succumbed to the darkness. His once noble heart became cold, his mind twisted into something cruel and tyrannical. Under Amenemhat's rule, Egypt transformed. The people who once revered him as a benevolent ruler now feared him as a tyrant. His eyes, now glinting with a supernatural malice, no longer saw his people as subjects but as worshippers, devotees to his twisted godhood. His voice was law. His commands were not questioned. Pharaoh Amenemhat ordered that every home, every temple, and every pyramid be adorned with statues of himself. He claimed to be the living embodiment of Ra and demanded his subjects worship him as the sun god, not just as a king, but as an immortal being. The people were forced to bow before his every whim. The slightest defiance met with execution or exile. No longer content with the riches of the Nile, Amenemhat sought to drain the life force of the land itself. He began draining sacred energies from the temples and the tombs of Egypt's greatest rulers, using dark rituals to grow his power. His reach extended beyond the mortal realm, tapping into forgotten magics that were sealed away for eternity. But this hunger for control would be his undoing. Deep beneath the desert sands, in the silent tombs of Egypt's greatest kings and queens, a stirring began. The ancient rulers, whose bodies had long since decayed, felt the disturbance in the earth. The power that once kept them in their eternal rest was weakening, unraveling as Amenemhat's dark rituals drew from the very essence of their ancient lives. In the darkness of their tombs, their spirits awoke. The kings and queens, once mighty rulers of Egypt, rose from their graves in spectral form. Their souls, angry and vengeful at the desecration of their sacred tombs, gathered under the leadership of the great king Ramses II, the greatest of all Egyptian pharaohs. With them were the spirits of the pharaohs of old, Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, Seti I, Cleopatra, and even the great Imhotep, whose wisdom transcended time. Together, they formed an army of the past, a council of kings and queens who were determined to reclaim Egypt from Amenemhat's dark grasp. Their ethereal forms were invulnerable to mortal weapons, and their wisdom could not be challenged by the pharaoh's tyrannical rule. They began to rise from their tombs, leaving behind golden chariots that appeared to float upon the sands and armies of mummified soldiers long buried. The ground shook as the spirits of the ancient kings marched toward the heart of Amenemhat's kingdom, and as they did, the people of Egypt began to whisper of the god's wrath. The time had come for the pharaoh to face the consequence of his actions. As Amenemhat sat upon his grand throne, his mind clouded by the dark magic that had taken hold of him, a thunderous sound echoed through his palace, a sound that seemed to come from the very earth itself. When he looked out of his chamber, He saw the forms of the kings of Egypt rising from the sands, their eyes burning with righteous fury. The confrontation was inevitable. Amenemhat stood in the royal hall, now a towering figure cloaked in shadows, while the ancient kings, dressed in their ethereal regalia, stood before him. Ramses II stepped forward, his voice as powerful as it had been in life. "You defile Egypt with your darkness, Amenemhat," Ramses said, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. "You have stolen our power and corrupted our legacy. The gods of Egypt do not tolerate such arrogance." The ground beneath Amenemhat's feet began to crack as the dark fog swirled, gathering strength. But he had become a creature of pure darkness now, a ruler far more powerful than any mortal could ever hope to be. His body was an embodiment of shadow, his mind consumed by the very evil he had unleashed. He raised his hands, summoning an army of dark entities to defend him. But the spirits of Egypt's kings had their own magic, one that transcended death. The ghosts of the past summoned storms of sand, casting the dark fog into the heavens. Imhotep, once a sage and healer, wielded the ancient powers of Egypt's forgotten gods to banish the shadows that had corrupted Amenemhat. In a final, cataclysmic battle, the spirits of the ancient kings converged upon Amenemhat, stripping him of the dark powers that had consumed him. As they did, the pharaoh's body disintegrated into the very shadows he had conjured. His reign of terror came to a swift and tragic end. With Amenemhat's death, the spirits of Egypt's rulers returned to their tombs, leaving behind a world forever changed. The people of Egypt, once oppressed and fearful, began to rebuild. The ancient temples were restored, and the worship of the gods returned to its rightful place. The legacy of the pharaohs, both the mortal and immortal, was revived, and the land flourished once again. But the story of Amenemhat's dark reign would be told for generations, a warning to those who sought to tamper with the forces of the past, to those who would seek to defy the natural order. And in the deepest corners of the Valley of the Kings, where the tombs of the pharaohs lay silent, there was always a whisper carried on the wind, a reminder that the darkness of the past could never truly be forgotten.